Hello, Anne Poelina, and thank you so much for joining with us in conversation for this part of our Changing Our Minds series. A really warm welcome to you. Just to contextualise Changing Our Minds a little bit, we think of it as an exploration of wisdom and action that might help humanity move into a new era of mutual flourishing for all species on the Earth, what we might call an ecozoic era. My name is Deborah Colvin. I'm part of the Earth Justice team at St James's Church in Piccadilly, London. I grew up in Australia and my background includes farming, science and education. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people in the present city of Geelong, Victoria, Australia. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and want to thank them for their care of country, both in the past and now, and continuing their culture on this sacred land. And I spent the first 18 years of my life on Wadawurrung country and know that my being is patterned by this place. Also, many people watching this conversation will be in the British Isles, and I'd like to acknowledge the long history of this land now called Britain and all of the beings within it. We know that humans have lived on this land for at least 35,000 years, and for much of this time, the land was acknowledged as sacred, with ceremonies, songs, and ways of relating that made a living bond between land and people. So, really delighted that Professor Anne Poelina has agreed to speak with us today. Anne is a Nyikina Warrawa woman from the Kimberley region of Western Australia, an active community leader, human and earth rights advocate, filmmaker, poet, playwright, and respected academic. Her second PhD explored first law multi-species justice in the Martuwarra River, also known as the Fitzroy River in English. Anne describes herself as a woman who belongs to the Martuwarra River. Anne, a very warm welcome to you. And I wonder if you would mind just telling us a little bit about your background and how you come to be doing the work you do.
Yeah. Mabubara. Ngajinu nila wala en Poelina. Ngayu I Martuwarra manan. Ngai mandajara nyigana nganga. Ngai mabu ngurinyan nganga on Jugun and Yaru country in Broome. Broome is my home. So in my language, I said, good day. My name is Anne Poelina, and I'm a woman who belongs to the Martuwarra, the Fitzroy River. So in terms of that, the river owns me, the construction of my identity, giving me the laws in which to self-regulate my behaviour. So the Martuwarra, the Fitzroy River, is everything. So just speaking with you today from Broome, which is Jugun and Yaru country, and just acknowledging this because country is alive. It is a living entity and it helps us to create memories and tell the stories that we tell. So, yeah, thank you for that introduction and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. It's very, very important that we look at this from, the well-being perspective of all of us in terms of humanity and where we're going with right-sizing the planet. So thank you for the opportunity to share with your listeners. And let's have a dialogue and see what we can share in terms of wisdom and our duty of care to look after Mother Earth wherever we are.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. I wonder if you could just describe your work in the Fitzroy River and the history of what's happened there in the last, a couple of decades at least now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is a very interesting place, and for me, it's not a job; it's destiny.
Yeah.
This is what I was born to do. So, part of this is to look at where my being has come from and what brought me to this place, and it is because of the matriarchal side of my family. My great grandmother came into a place called Nukumbar after a very large massacre in the Kimberley, where most of her family were murdered, and came into a place called Nukumbar and met a beautiful human being and gave birth to my grandmother and then my mother and now me and then my daughter. So it's a very strong matrilineal line in terms of women also being wisdom keepers and knowledge holders and holders of women law. And one of the big things that women bring in terms of our lens and our ethics of care is that we're almost programmed, we're wired to have an ethics of care, to care about the young, to care about everything and everyone around us. So I think these are the values, the ethics, the virtues that has been handed down to me. So that's what I'm saying is that for me, it's not a job. It's, it's 24/7, 7 days a week, and it's what I do with love and passion and care. And I guess this story of the Marawara is a very, very important story because we believe that in a way we've got the opportunity to work with very important and very caring wisdom keepers who come together on part of the Marawara Fitzroy River Council to share this knowledge, to come, from a cooperative way of being united, sharing wisdom, and that the fact that we are dealing with complexity and we need collective wisdom. So, what I say to many people is the wisest people in the world that I know cannot read and write English. They've held this knowledge
Mm.
system through oral presentation, generation after generation, and passing that on because, as I said, we care about everything and everyone around us. It's a bit like what Eleanor Ostrom used to write about in terms of caring for the commons for our greater common good. So I come from a world where regional governance was a very big way that we lived and cared about each other. So we always cared from a leadership governance perspective around what is now being framed as a bioregional um, framework in terms of looking at these places from total watershed perspective. Because one of the things that we understand, particularly with the other elders, is that when we're talking about a catchment and a system that starts at the top of the mountains and then comes all the way down to where I live at the mouth of the river, what we see and how we've governed is always from a regional bioregional perspective. So that thinking is really wisdom that Indigenous people have had in this country, in Australia, from the beginning of time. We always looked at this from a regional perspective. This is very, very interesting in terms of what we do, is that when we look at this, we're able to capture diversity. We're able to capture a whole of regional approach because at the end of the day, as I said, it's looking after the commons for the common good. But now we've moved into an era of modernity where people are looking at what we see as our family and kin as resources. And so there's a very, um, very big, I wouldn't say opportunity, but in terms of the unjust development that's coming our way, it's really about how to take the things that we love and turn them into a resource, to capitalize them and to then trade them off. So, what we're saying is that we need a different
Mm.
way to look at how we have leadership and governance, and that when we look at climate,
Mm.
um, the situation of climate, what's happening with climate change, what we're saying is that unless we're dealing at these sorts of issues from a total cumulative perspective, we have no understanding of how do we work together in a pathway that's going to include all of us, Indigenous and not, and all of the stakeholders, is saying that we're in a moment in time where we need to think about how we proceed with development in this region because it's very, very precious. So part of that story is looking at alternative ways that we can ground the economies, and I call it the economies of well-being, around culture, around conservation, around
Mm.
regeneration, around healing lands, and looking at how do we heal climate from that perspective that all of us need to be at the table and really thinking about how we do planning and development and manage the place in which we all live.
Mm. That reminds me a little bit of the kind of dictum of if you are doing agriculture, you're not growing crops, you're nourishing soil. That needs to be the approach that you take in order to be able to work with the land like that. So, in
Yeah.
terms of the green economies and the future, uh, is there how does that work with the way that you govern in the Marwara region? Are there conflicts? How can we take your example and apply that elsewhere?
Oh, I think wherever colonialism has gone, it's come from a basis of conflict. You know what I mean? So when you look at
Mm.
colonialism around the world, what we see is, somebody coming in and having ideas that they think is best for you rather than what is the voice of us collectively. So when I look at colonialism, it's from a conflict paradigm. So you come in, you conquest, you take over, you create um, chaos and uncertainty. And what we're saying is that the way that I'm not sure if any of the viewers have been watching, but there's been an amazing um, amazing person who's guided my life around colonialism and understanding that. And I think it's very, very important because some of the conversation that's coming out globally is how do we deconstruct colonialism? How do we come back to the very roots of how we work together as independent and collective societies? How can we work together to understand not only cumulative impacts of development, but how can we come together to look at what the new economies can be, should be, must be? And so this conversation that we have is looking at culture, conservation, regeneration, because there's been a lot, even though colonialism has only been here for 150 years, there's been intense destruction of the cultural landscape, loss of species, all of those sorts of things. And so coming in with these new sets of, as I said earlier, values and ethics and virtues, which are clashing with the lifestyle and the values and ethics we have as Indigenous people. And then you create this competition between resources of the haves and the have-nots. And even where I live, we have Indigenous neoliberal leaders who believe they know what's best for everyone else. So it's not a perfect system. What colonialism has created is chaos, uncertainty. And so therefore, what we're looking at is really taking a step back and looking at what I call bottom-up governance that comes from the bottom up, not top down. So the Marawarra Fitzroy River Council is very, very unique. We started off looking at how do we work with the major native title groups or traditional owner groups within the region, and then we realised that they needed to really be looked after by someone who could support them. So the Marawarra Fitzroy River Council is really a collection of amazing elders who come from the top of the catchment to the bottom, who come with a good heart and a spirit of goodwill, who want to create dialogue, who want to create transformation, and know that all that we do must be grounded in evidence-based practice from two-way science or Indigenous science and Western science, but also looking at the concepts of law, Lawlore, and trying to look at that and think, how can we come together? Because what we say is the land is alive, it holds memory, but the land is the law, not man. So law of the land, not law of man. And so when we think of these ethics of care, land ethics in a way, what does that teach us? What does growing up from inside an environment that teaches us to grow in ethics of care? Like when we're born as Indigenous people, we are given what we call a totem or an animal or a creature or a flower, something that teaches you that the world is beyond just you as an individual, to teach you to look down, to look up, to look all around you, to think about nature as our kin, as our relative, and think about how do we, build this spirituality, build this sense of oneness from the bottom up. So the Marawarra Council is very, very different. We have amazing partners that we work with nationally, regionally, globally, that also help us. So what we're looking at is, instead of destruction and continual, destruction not of just the land and the waters, but of animals and birds and trees and flowers. I mean, I don't need to tell our listeners how much destruction has happened in this country with the introduction of settler society. And so we're at a moment in time where we really need to take stock and have a total reset and think about, how do we collectively look at the new economies? Can we have, exactly as you said, as farmers have always done from the beginning of time, how can we see the soil and regenerate it and heal it and put carbon back rather than continuing to extract it? So really it's a space for think tanks, for working with different people who come in with new ideas. But this idea that the new economies can be about walking country. So we're creating a walking trail along Marawarra, along the Fitzroy River, because one of the things the elders said is that if we want people to care about this place, we must share it with you. And so we're creating this walking trail along the river, which is really, in a way, a bit of a laboratory in terms of allowing us to look at what is the baseline of places like a riparian zone, what are the species there, what are the animals, how can we walk people through, how can they, in a way, feel and hear the land so that they can start to develop an ethics of care and think about this place as something wonderful that needs to be here for generations to come. So it's really a think tank that works with a lot of different people, comes in with new ideas, looking at local governance, looking at regional governance, looking at local government, and their duty of care and responsibility to citizens in the region, and trying to create, in a way, a dialogic space where we can come together and grow new ideas and new economies. So, culture conservation, regeneration. So, we're looking at globally unique, this Fitzroy River, creating a walking trail, mapping cultural and environmental sites of significance, and having that information to share with people so that they can experience what it is like to come and feel the land.
That's so rich. It covers every part of life, doesn't it? Um,
Mm.
I love the way you talk about Indigenous science. I'm trained as a scientist myself, I wonder if you could say a little bit about what Indigenous science is and what it has to offer.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because a lot of people go, "Oh, it's too traditional knowledge, it's two-way knowledge." No, it's science. We were the first everything. I
Mm,
mean, we managed the first water industry in the world. We practice eugenics in terms of who you could marry, who you can't marry, what is relationships built on, all of those sorts of things. Biodiversity. I mean, this concept that Indigenous people globally, or particularly in our country, Australia, were nomadic and just wandered aimlessly as hunter gatherers. That's a myth. We had
mm,
estates that we had to manage as Indigenous farmers. And so, this
mm,
knowledge system that we have grown from the beginning of time is around understanding that really what is science? Science is knowledge and wisdom to ensure that we can collectively start to learn and share the world that we're in together so that we can all reach our full potential. So, you know, stone fish traps. We have, I'm just finding out now we have got stone fish traps along the Fitzroy River, and I'm kind of going, why would we need to do that when we have a plant that helps us to do sustainable fishing? We have a plant that we can crush
mm,
up in the water, put it in the water. It relaxes the gills in the muscles of the fish. They come up for oxygen. We see which fish we want when we pick that fish up, and that's what we harvest. And then within a short period of time, the fish start to become oxygenated again, and they swim off. So I kind of thought, why did we build stone fish traps in the middle of the Fitzroy River when we've got a plant that can help us to sustainably harvest the fish we want at that moment in time, So um, all of those
mm,
sorts of things. So plants that we have in terms of our medicine, nutrition, all of those sorts of things. So that's science. And so looking at
mm,
not just
mm.
two-way knowledge,
Absolutely.
but Indigenous knowledges from a multidisciplinary perspective, geology, anthropology, archaeology, these are all the things that we manage from the beginning of time. Leadership, governance, all of these sorts of things coming together so that we can share this knowledge and wisdom so that each of us can reach our full potential as human beings. So, um, yeah, I write a lot about it, both Indigenous science and first law. So what we're saying is that, yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's all in the frame, and once you've got a frame, you've got a
Mm,
claim. So for me, I'm saying no, this is not just knowledge that's just happened in the last 100 and 200 years. This is wisdom that we have learned from living very close, being engaged with the land, understanding water, understanding the environment, understanding the atmosphere, understanding through songlines the way that we mapped and traversed the country using the stars. So yeah, I think it's important that we start to frame it in the correct way of Indigenous science because, as I said, it's knowledge, it's wisdom, it's practice that's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. And we want to bring that into working with Western scientists in terms of saying, as I said earlier, we're dealing with complexity and we need collective wisdom. And without this wisdom,
yeah.
we're not going to be able to right size our own environments.
Yeah, yeah, the complexity and the holism that is evident when you speak like that. It makes me think that this kind of science is something that you live rather than something that you do, which I think is probably missing from a lot of our Western paradigm. You
Yeah, no,
mentioned
that's
the
right.
song lines there briefly. Yeah, I think I think our viewers would really love to hear a bit from you about the song lines and what that means.
Yeah. So, as Indigenous people, lots of our knowledge and wisdom is stored in stories, it's stored in songs, it's stored in paintings. So, as I said earlier, like the wisest people in the world that I know cannot read and write. How do they hold these knowledges in their memory, in the songs, in the dance. So we have this concept called song lines. Some people call them song cycles, some people call them song spirals. But what that is that it's really a song line that teaches you how to travel the nation, how to travel your own estate, how to travel and traverse the different areas. So Kimberley people have got song lines that took us from the Kimberley all the way to Melbourne in terms of the Bougon moth and being able to share and trade. So in the song lines, they're a map for how you move through the landscape. So the songs teach us how to traverse from place to place so that we have continuity. When you get to a place and you know the song line, you can then move on to the next phase, because what it tells you in the songs is significant places in the landscape, so that as you traverse the country, you know you're on track. So these are held in songs, they're held in dance, they're held in ceremony, and we could traverse the whole countryside through these song lines. So they're maps that guide us through the landscape based on specific sites that we would approach as we came closer, and then we'd sing the song so that the map would take us to the next place. So this is a very, very important pathway through song lines that connected us as we traversed the whole of this continent.
Amazing. I'm wondering if words like faith and hope are relevant to you, and if so, how would you describe them?
Yeah, faith is a really important story. I'm sort of in the age where we start to say that we are going down people. We don't have a lot of time left, and that part of this process is to move our knowledge system and to share it with not just with our young people, but globally. So in terms of faith, I have been a Christian. But what it did was it brought me back to a place where I kind of started to travel around this country, speak to other senior elders. And when I talked to them about some of the Christian fables, they would connect it to their Dreamtime stories. And so it wasn't an elitist thing that I'm a Christian or I'm this, I'm that. It was really part of their spirituality, of the human
Yeah.
spirit. What does it take to ignite the human spirit so we grow this ethics of care? So the stories of the fables that we have from the Bible, we have those first law stories as well, about how not to be a greedy man, how not to cheat and do harm, and all of those sorts of things. So really there's a lot of synergy in terms of this. And so I thought, well, in terms of being a Christian, I am a faith-based human being that really wants to ignite not just my human spirit, but the human spirit of people I meet and come into connection and go, well, what does a human spirit ignite? What does it teach us? And it teaches us values. It teaches us ethics. It shows us virtues, right from wrong. So really, I don't think there's any difference. As I said, I think it's a fusion of both spirituality and faith-based stories. I have many, many people who are faith-based leaders that I work very, very closely with, because it seems that this faith-based movement is growing globally. That
Yeah.
people can come together, because at the end of the day, it's not about difference; it's about sameness. That's what the human spirit does. It sort of, removes that veil of, in a way, elitism. I'm this, I'm that, to make you really come back to, I am a human being, a creature that has been created by a creator that teaches me I have a spirit that is my moral compass, that teaches me right from wrong, that guides me through life, that teaches me about danger and all of those things. And then we bring in that conversation from Indigenous first law stories with the fables that we hear from Christianity, even the Brothers Grimm stories. They're teaching us values, ethics, virtues,
Yeah.
how to be a good human being is really the dream.
Mm. 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 And I understand that you contributed to the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si in 2015. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
through
So that must
Notre
have
Dame University. Yeah,
been an
yeah.
amazing period.
It is amazing that we can connect to these systems that sometimes we think are so elitist, but at the end of the day, they're human beings involved. And so, not only did
Yeah.
I write a story for Laudato Si, but I got to work with some amazing scientists from the Vatican. And I remember one day one of the scientists standing up and going, oh, what are we doing as faith-based or religious leaders? Because we're standing at the pulpit, but the church is empty. What have we done to push the people away? And then he started talking about different things like, when we started to talk about energy, he says, oh, we have something from the creator and it's
Mm,
free and it's called the sun.
mm,
Why aren't we using more solar? Why aren't we doing these sorts of things? So I think really one of the things my journey has taught me is not to focus on elitism, but really focus on sameness, that we are human beings together
yeah,
and that we have a human
yeah,
spirit that needs to be ignited to do good, because we must be civil to each other and to where we're coming from in terms of, wherever we're based, whether we're in London or sitting on the banks of the
mm,
Fitzroy River. So, really it's trying to
mm,
come people into a cooperative way of learning, of working together, of trying to unpack the planetary crisis so we have planetary solutions so we can leave this story. You mentioned hope. Hope is really the thing that
yeah,
is the driving mechanism in the work we do, because without what I call building this coalition of hope, it would be easy to give up and say, oh, it's too hard. So I talk about
yeah,
it as building that coalition of hope, finding those like minded people who want to dream that we can have a future with the world
mm,
and within the world. So for me, hope
mm,
is a very, very important catalyst for doing the things I do, because it would be so easy to go, it's too hard, I'm going to give up. But hope is what drives this.
mm,
Hope is finding people like yourself, finding people who are out there who want to reach out and challenge the systems that we have to grow an ethics of care from the bottom up rather than top down centralized toxic power. So, from that
yeah,
perspective, faith and hope are two key ingredients that keep me going. And what I'm saying is that I have many friends who come from multiple faiths. And when you see the fact that we've got Muslims and Christians and Jews and everybody coming together and saying hope and faith is what needs to connect us if we are to have a climate chance.
yeah, yeah. And just you work all across the world. I'm a rural person at heart, but I live in the centre of London, and I have done for a long time. I don't know whether you have any reflections on the fact that 9 billion of us on the earth will be living mainly in cities. Now really, whether you have any thoughts about the possibilities and the challenges of that.
Well, there are challenges, and I guess part of this is opportunity as well. And so, I guess
Mm,
one of the things that I see with the work is, when do we say that the city is full? It's
yeah.
beyond capacity. When do we say that? We just keep cramming more and more and more and more and more and more people. And, one of the things is there comes a point where we need to really start to look at how do we decentralize the cities and get out to the regions and build capacity in the regions, but also
Mm,
opportunities for families, because most people want to concentrate in being in the city because they believe that's the best place that they can give their family the best opportunities in life. But what I'm seeing more and more is
mm,
that people are moving out into the regions and creating regional, small, intentional communities and getting together and finding like minded people in these regions and really doing that. And in a way, as I said, it goes back to the concept that we had, where we looked at this from what we call a bioregional perspective, where we had intentional communities that worked together from the beginning of time, but always realized that we needed to look at each other and work together on scale as well as the smaller intentional communities. So, one of the big things I'm
mm,
really looking at the moment, particularly in Australia, um, is this concept around bioregions and biocultural regions, where we have Indigenous people who can come together and get organised and have their conversations and dialogue, but move into a much bigger regional framework of conversation and dialogue and bring their thinking in to be able to look at how do we manage our systems from a regional perspective. And I guess for me, that's one of the big challenges that I look at with the Murray-Darling Basin is it's a huge system, and
mm,
we create
mm,
uncertainty and chaos by going to such large scale, when really the wisdom that we have as Indigenous people is to look at this from a bioregional, biocultural perspective and look at how do we all come together in a dialogic process that's going to create transformational change. So, cities are there, but I think really in terms of how do we sustain ourselves, and this is one of the big stories from Total Reset, from the work of Greg Campbell, is we need to create intentional
Yeah.
communities. And those intentional communities can happen in cities. And, in my
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
in the last 20 years, when I've traveled around, I've seen, community gardens get up in cities, catchment management work
Yeah.
getting up in waterways, a rehabilitation of different things. So, what we're saying is that even in the city, I guess the point is find a new family, find a new clan, find a intentional community that you can work with, that you can build your hopes and your faith and your dreams around. So it's not to say, oh, we can't help the city. It's
Mm.
how to create these intentional communities where we come together with hope, with love, with an ethics of care to go, okay, let's care about each other. And that's one of the things that COVID did, actually. It showed us that we're not isolates, that
Mm.
an elder can put up in their window, hey, is there anyone going downtown? Can they pick up my mail? Can they get the milk? So COVID has actually created a pause where we living in cities have had to reflect and think, well, who's around me in terms of this intentional community of care that I can work with, that I can support, that I can put my energy and love into.
Yeah, yeah. And you can even think of cities bioregionally within cities. There are many
Mm,
small micro bioregions within
mm,
cities that
mm.
it makes me think of the River Tyburn in London, which has been forced underground for the last hundreds of years, and it flows right under Buckingham Palace and into the Thames. And we just don't think about what's under there and this living river, which is still passing through. So
Exactly.
we're short on time. Yeah. Can I just ask you to finish then? We Westerners we're not out to kind of take Indigenous wisdom and be something different, but how can we, in all our life ways, be more Indigenous? I've heard you talk about us all being Indigenous to planet Earth. What do you think? What advice can you give us about all of us, especially in the cities, being more Indigenous?
I think the most important thing is to build a relationship with the land and the environment that you're with. Once you connect to the land, then you become part of it. It becomes your kin. You create a kinship relationship. So what we're wanting people to do is just slow down a bit, feel where
Mm,
they are, understand that environment, build a relationship with it. Some people think I'm a little bit loopy because I say talk to the land. Find somewhere special in the
mhm,
city that you can go and start to build a relationship on a riverbank with a tree, with a special place. Could be even be a cathedral, because one of the things we say is that it doesn't matter that it's concrete, it's still country. So find these
yeah.
special places where you can start to create a relationship. Talk to the land. And some people go, oh, that's a bit loopy. But you will find that once you become attentional to that place, it will reveal its secrets slowly. You will start to
Mm,
see things that you have not imagined were there. And so it's
mm,
creating a relationship, because that's what it's all about. So what I'm saying is that
mm,
wherever you are, find that special place, create that relationship, learn to think of the land as being alive and that you are an important vessel for that land. And so therefore you have a claim because you're wanting to develop that relationship. So it's all about relationship, all about how we can work together, how we can just slow down in our lives and hear and feel place.
mm, mm. We're doing something right in St James's in the heart of Piccadilly. Then once a month we have a silent liturgy in the garden where we just stay as far as we can in communion with the more than human world in the garden.
And it's not silent.
Well,
It has many
no,
voices.
no, really not. It's full of life.
Yeah. No.
Anne, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and all of the work that you do. It's been really good making a connection with you, and I'm sure that all the people that engage with this, a lot of people will do a lot of learning. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity, Deborah. Kalia Mabo.